I pay my sister's rent for 8 months. She's your sister. It's your duty, my parents always said, but when I found out that she called me loser behind my back the next day. She's your sister. It's your duty. That's what my parents used to say. Every time I hesitated, every time I even thought about saying no. Monica was doing well in college, they told me, and they made it very clear that it wasn't their responsibility to pay her rent. It was mine. I fought them about it once. Not just a little argument, a real, full-blown fight. I told them it wasn't fair, that they had more money than me, that Monica was their daughter, not mine, that it wasn't my job to support a perfectly capable adult when I was already busting my ass at work just to keep my own life together. Dad barely looked up from his phone. Mom folded her arms and said, "You're single, Brad. No wife, no kids. You can afford it." I remember laughing in disbelief. So let me get this straight. You two, our parents, don't have to pay a dime, but I do. Because I'm not married. Mom rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic. That was the end of it. I lost. So for 8 months, I sent Monica $2,300 like clockwork. No questions asked. No thank yous. No acknowledgement at all. She never even brought it up in conversation. It was like she expected it. Like I was just another bill that got paid automatically. I told myself it didn't matter. She was my sister. Family helps family, right? That's what I told myself every time I wired the money. Then my grandfather called last week. He's the only one in the family who's ever really looked out for me. He sounded hesitant. Like he wasn't sure what to say. At first I thought maybe something had happened. Maybe Monica was in trouble. Then he said, "I have to tell you something, Brad, and I know you're not going to like it." I asked what was wrong. He sighed, then told me exactly what Monica had said to him. She called me a loser. Not just once, not just in passing. She laughed about it. She said to him, "What kind of loser would you have to be to pay my rent? Of course I can do it myself, but it's better for me if he does it." I didn't say anything. I think my brain just refused to process it at first. Grandpa kept talking. She said like it was funny. Like she knew you'd keep paying no matter what. Like she thought you were a joke. I felt sick. After everything, after all these months of covering for her, this is what she thought of me. I was just a walking ATM to her. Just some pathetic fool stupid enough to keep handing over thousands of dollars without question. I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt. I wanted to drive to her apartment right then and there. But Grandpa stopped me. "Don't do anything stupid, Brad. I have a better idea." I forced myself to breathe. He was right. Storming over there wouldn't change anything. But the next rent was due in 8 days. And this time, it wasn't coming. For the first time in 8 months, I didn't send Monica her rent money. I waited. I wanted to see how long it would take her to realize the free ride was over. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, still nothing. Day 3, I started to think that maybe, just maybe, she had been paying for herself all along. That maybe Grandpa had misunderstood, or maybe Monica had exaggerated when she bragged about using me. But on the 4th day, my phone rang. It was my mother. Not Monica, my mother. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. "Mom, Brad, why hasn't Monica gotten her rent money?" Not a question, not a polite request, just a demand. As if I were a customer service representative who forgot to process a transaction. I stared at the screen. This was it. That was the moment they realized I wasn't playing. I didn't respond. A few hours later, another text message. "Mom, Brad, answer me." So I did. "Mom, Monica just told me that her landlord contacted her. She's going to get a late fee because of you." Fix it. Because of me? I actually laughed. The audacity was insane. Still, I didn't answer. On the 5th day, Monica finally called. I let it ring. Then she texted me. "Monica, hey, didn't get the rent today? What's up?" "No, please. No. Thanks for literally paying my rent for 8 months. Just what's up?" I didn't answer. 3 hours later. "Monica, Brad, I need the money. You're putting me in a bad position here. I was having dinner with Grandpa, when I showed him the texts. He chuckled. Let her squirm a little. And she did squirm. Day 6, another call. Another text. Monica, Brad? Are you seriously ignoring me? Monica, you know I need the money. Monica, this isn't funny. You're screwing with me for no reason. For no reason. That's when I finally responded. Me, I'm done paying your rent. Figure out yourself. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. I picked it up. The first thing out of her mouth. What the hell's wrong with you? Not why. How can we not talk? Just anger. I kept my voice calm. I know what you said about me, Monica. Silence. Then she scoffed. What are you talking about? Grandpa told me. How you laughed about it. How you said I was a loser for paying your rent when you could do it yourself. Another silence. But this one was different. This wasn't shock. This wasn't guilt. This was her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew. When she spoke again, her tone was sharp. Wow, you're really mad about this? It was a joke, Brad. God, you're so sensitive. I clenched my fist. A joke? Yeah, a joke. Grandpa took it out of context. I almost believed her. For a second, I even considered that maybe I was overreacting. But then I remembered she never denied saying it. I took a deep breath. Joke or not, I'm done. Pay your own rent. She snapped. I can't. That got my attention. You can't? I repeated. What happened to of course I can do it myself? More silence. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone. Something didn't add up. I looked at Grandpa. She said she couldn't. He grinned. Told you this would be interesting. And he was right. Because the next day, I found out that Monica wasn't in college at all. I didn't hear from Monica for the rest of the night. No more calls. No more texts. I thought maybe she had given up until the next morning when my mother showed up at my apartment. Not a call. Not a text. She showed up. I opened the door, and before I could even say a word, she pushed past me and stepped inside. What the hell is wrong with you, Brad? I sighed. Good morning to you, too. She spun around, arms crossed. Monica just told me you're refusing to pay her rent. Are you out of your mind? I leaned against the counter. No, Mom. I just finally got some sense. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? I crossed my arms. It means I know what Monica said about me. I know she's been laughing behind my back. And I know she never actually needed my help. She was just using me. Mom rolled her eyes so hard I thought she'd pass out. Oh, please. You're throwing a tantrum over a stupid joke. I stared at her. That was the second time someone had called it a joke. She sighed, shaking her head like I was an idiot. Listen, it doesn't matter what she said. She needs that money. You can't just leave her stranded. I clenched my jaw. She said she could do it herself. Brad. No, Mom. Answer me. She said of course I can do it myself. But it's better if he does. So why can't she? My mother hesitated just for a second. But I saw it. That was when I knew there was something else going on. I kept my voice calm. Is she even in school? Her face twitched just slightly. Of course she is. I folded my arms. Where? She scoffed. What kind of question is that? I repeated slowly this time. Where's she going to school, Mom? Silence. A long, painful silence. Then she shook her head. This is ridiculous. Just send the money, Brad. I exhaled sharply, half laughing. She's not in school. Is she? Mom glared at me like I was the problem. She needed time to figure things out. Okay, you wouldn't understand. I felt my stomach drop. You mean to tell me I've been paying her rent for 8 months, and she hasn't been in school this whole time? She didn't even flinch. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. I let out a short laugh. So what has she been doing then? Just sitting in that apartment, living for free? Mom waved her hand. She's been thinking about what she wants to do, and she didn't need the stress of a job on top of that. I was in shock. I had been breaking my back, wiring her $2,300 a month, thinking I was helping my hardworking little sister get through school. Meanwhile, she had been sitting in that apartment doing absolutely nothing. And my parents knew. They knew, and they didn't say a word. Because to them, it was easier to let me handle it. I took a deep breath. I'm done. Mom scoffed. No, you're not. I shook my head. You don't get it, do you? I'm done. I'm not sending another penny. Her expression darkened. You don't have a choice. I actually laughed. I don't have a choice. Are you serious? It's my money. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. She's your sister, Brad. If you don't pay, she could get evicted. I shrugged. Then she can get a job. Mom's eyes widened like the concept was completely foreign to her. She's not ready for that yet. I scoffed. Then she should have thought about that before blowing off school and living on my dime. She opened her mouth to argue again, but I held up a hand. I don't care, Mom. You can threaten, guilt trip, cry whatever you want. But I am done. She's your daughter. You figure it out. Her face turned red. You're being so incredibly selfish right now. I almost exploded at that. Selfish? Selfish? I pointed to the door. Leave. She stared at me like she couldn't believe I was actually standing up to her. Then she scoffed and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sat down on the couch, my head spinning. 8 months. 8 months of working overtime, budgeting, saying no to things I wanted because I thought I was doing something good. And the whole time, I was just an idiot getting played. My phone buzzed. A text from Grandpa. Grandpa, so how'd it go? I stared at the message for a second. Then I responded. Me. They're panicking. A moment later. Grandpa. Good. Let's make it worse. After my mother stormed out, things escalated fast. I expected more texts, maybe a few guilt-tripping calls. What I didn't expect was for my father to get involved. He usually stayed out of things. But apparently, this was the hill my parents were willing to die on. The next morning, I woke up to an email from him. Short, and to the point something about how I was damaging the family. And how? We don't abandon each other. No mention of the fact that they had completely abandoned their own responsibilities as parents and shoved them onto me. Then came the phone calls from extended family. Aunts, uncles, even a couple of cousins, people who had never once cared about my life suddenly had a lot to say about how I was treating Monica. Someone had clearly been feeding them story, because every single one of them seemed to think that I had suddenly decided to cut her off for no reason. The best part? No one mentioned the fact that she wasn't even in school. That little detail was conveniently left out. Meanwhile, Monica had gone radio silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. That was strange. She had been furious just a day ago, so the sudden silence meant one of two things. Either she was scrambling to fix things herself, or she was planning something. I didn't have to wonder for long. 3 days after my mother's little visit, Monica finally reached out. But not to me, she went straight to my boss. I got pulled into a meeting that afternoon. My manager looked uncomfortable, sliding his phone across the desk. I glanced down and saw an email from Monica. It was full of accusations, claims that I was financially abusive, that I had manipulated her into depending on me, that I had suddenly pulled the money as a way to punish her. She made it sound like I had been controlling every aspect of her life, and now that she wasn't doing what I wanted, I was destroying her stability. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My boss asked if everything was okay, clearly trying to give me the benefit of the doubt. I took a deep breath and calmly explained the situation, how I had been paying her rent, how she had lied about being in school, how I had simply stopped sending money that I never owed her in the first place. By the time I was done, my boss just shook his head and sighed. He told me he'd handle it. Monica's email went straight into the trash. But now I was furious. She hadn't just tried to guilt-trip me, she had gone after my job. Grandpa was right. It was time to make this worse. I started digging. It wasn't hard to find out what Monica had actually been doing for the last 8 months. No job, no classes, just a lot of expensive outings. Fancy dinners, new clothes, weekend trips with friends. The life of someone who had unlimited money and zero responsibilities. The kicker? The lease for her apartment wasn't even in her name. It was under my parents. So not only had they been lying to me about Monica being in school, but they had known she wasn't paying for anything herself. They had willingly let me take over a burden that wasn't even hers. That was all I needed. I stopped responding to their calls. When my mother showed up at my place again, I didn't even let her inside. I told her I knew everything and that I was done for real this time. I shut the door in her face before she could argue. And then I waited. 2 days later, the rent was due. And for the first time in 8 months, nothing was paid. I expected an explosion, some massive blow-up, but the silence that followed was somehow worse. No calls, no texts, just nothing. At first, I thought maybe they had finally given up. That maybe, just maybe, my parents had found a way to cover for Monica, and they'd all decided to cut their losses. But then I got a call from Grandpa. He was laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. Apparently, Monica and my parents had been scrambling behind the scenes, desperately trying to find a way to pay the rent without letting me know they had failed. But there was a problem. None of them had the money. It turned out my parents weren't as financially stable as they pretended to be. Grandpa had known for a while, but he never said anything because, as he put it, they were too proud to admit it. They had been living beyond their means for years, racking up debt to maintain their perfect image. And Monica? She had spent every dime I had given her without saving a single cent. So when the rent came due, none of them could afford it. And because the lease was in my parents' names, the landlord didn't go after Monica, he went after them. That's when the panic really set in. Monica tried calling the landlord to ask for an extension. He refused. My parents tried to take out a loan. They got denied. They even reached out to other family members, but no one wanted to lend them thousands of dollars on such short notice. Then they did exactly what I expected. They came crawling back to me. It started with a single text from my mother. No demands this time, no anger, just pure desperation. She said they were in a tough spot and asked if I could please help them out just this one last time. I ignored it. An hour later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, I could hear something in his voice I had never heard before. Panic. He didn't yell, didn't scold, he just begged. Said they were going to lose everything if I didn't step in. Still, I said nothing. That night, I got the final text. This one was from Monica. No fake excuses. No pretending. Just one sentence. Please, Brad. I don't know what to do. I stared at it for a long time. She had spent months laughing about how stupid I was. How easy it was to manipulate me. How I was nothing but a loser who'd keep paying as long as she played her cards right. And now here she was, helpless. I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next day, the eviction notice was posted. The eviction notice hit them harder than I expected. Monica went into full meltdown mode. She had never faced real consequences before. There was always someone cleaning up her mess, making sure she never had to deal with the real world. But this time, there was no backup plan, no safety net. At first, she stayed in the apartment, hoping something would magically fix itself. Maybe she thought the landlord would give her more time. Maybe she thought I'd crack and come to her rescue at the last second. But I didn't. And when the landlord finally locked her out, reality smacked her in the face. That's when she turned to our parents. Except they had a problem of their own. A big one. I hadn't realized just how deep they were in debt until Grandpa told me everything. My parents weren't just struggling financially. They were on the edge of complete collapse. The apartment they rented from Monica was just one of the many disasters they were juggling. Their mortgage? They had been behind on payments for months, dodging calls from the bank, shifting money around, barely staying afloat. The only reason they had lasted this long was because I had unknowingly been covering one of their biggest expenses. When I cut Monica off, the entire house of cards fell apart. 2 weeks after Monica lost her apartment, my parents lost their house. They tried to keep it quiet, but word spread fast. The bank finally foreclosed, and they had no backup plan. I wasn't there for the eviction, but Grandpa was. He watched from his truck across the street and later described the whole scene to me over lunch like it was the best entertainment he'd seen in years. He said my mother was hysterical, screaming at the movers. My father just stood there looking defeated, and Monica, she was sitting on the front steps, crying, as if she had never seen this coming. They ended up bouncing between motels, burning through what little money they had left. Grandpa thought it was hilarious. I stayed out of it. I didn't call, didn't check in, didn't ask where they were going next. I wasn't going to be their next bailout. Monica texted me one last time. This time, she didn't just ask for help, she begged. She told me she had nowhere to go, no job, no savings, no friends who would take her in. She told me I was her brother, and that family was supposed to take care of each other. That was rich, coming from her. I stared at the message for a while, thinking about everything she had done, everything my parents had done. Then I deleted it. And just like that, she was out of my life. A week later, Grandpa took me out for dinner. He looked proud. He told me this was the best thing I could have done, that he had waited years for me to wake up and stop letting them use me. He clapped me on the back, grinning, and said, "That's my boy." That night, I finally understood what he had been trying to teach me all along. Some people, even family, will use you if you let them. They will take and take and take, never once considering what it's costing you. And if you let them, they will never stop. The only way to end it is to walk away and let them deal with the mess they created. And that's exactly what I did.